Hi and welcome back to Herb's Vintage Tech. In my last video I talked about the Nikon D40 and that I think it's one of the best DSLRs ever made. But did you know that the Nikon D40 has a basically undocumented special mode? I call it the special retro mode. Is it a hack or is it a feature? Let's find out in this video. You can read a lot of literature about the D40, including the manual, but you can't find anything about a special or retro mode. Very few people ever mention it, and if they do, they talk about it as if it would be a major restriction. But I think it's one of the best features it has, because it makes you a better photographer. To show you what I mean, we have to go back into camera history a bit. Don't worry, it won't take too long. This is a folding rangefinder camera, as they were made from the 1940s to the 1960s. It captures its images on film, of course. In order to expose the images correctly, the photographer has to set the exposure time, the shutter speed, and the amount of light, the aperture, manually with these little wheels. The camera has a focusing aid called a rangefinder. Turning a wheel on the back brings the image in focus. Everything on the camera is mechanical. It has no computer, electronics, or even a battery. So how does one know what shutter speed and aperture to set if no computer tells you? There are two ways. Number one, you guess the exposure. You will be amazed how good you will get at this if you practice and do it a few hundred times. Number two, you use an external light meter like this one. You point the meter at a scene, press a button, match up the dial to the needle, and the meter will tell you what shutter speed and aperture to set. They are small, light, and easy to carry. What does that have to do with the D40? Be patient. 2 more minutes. This is a film DSLR from the 1980s, a Nikon FM2 to be exact. If there are classics in the camera world, this one is certainly one of them. It uses the same lens mount as the D40, so all lenses made for it will work on the D40 as well. This camera was also fully manual, except it had a simple light meter built in. Let's check out how it worked. In the viewfinder you saw your shutter speed on the left, your aperture on the top, and a little LED panel circled red here on the right. The LED panel had 3 symbols, a plus, a minus, and a circle. If the plus was lit, the meter thought the image was overexposed. If the minus was lit, the image was underexposed. If the circle was the only symbol lit, you had the correct exposure. Pretty simple, isn't it? But remember, this is still a film camera. Even with a light meter built in, you didn't really know what your images turned out until you developed the film. If you didn't have a smelly darkroom in your basement yourself, this process of developing the film could take days if not weeks. If photographers back then would have had any way to instantly check their photos, they would have given up the light meter immediately and would have probably thrown in a kidney. But today you can keep your organs, because for 30 to 100 bucks you can pick up a used Nikon D40, one of the best DSLRs ever made, and use it in its special retro mode. To put it in this mode, just attach an all-manual focus lens like in the 1980s. The first thing you will notice is how small and compact these lenses are, especially the prime lenses. That's because they don't contain any bulky autofocus motors or image stabilization stuff. This small size pairs them beautifully with the compact body of the Nikon D40. In a configuration like this, the D40 is compact but without being fiddly like many of the mirrorless cameras. The focus action of some of these vintage lenses is so smooth, if you've never experienced something like this, you will think they were made by angels in Santa's workshop. Or by elves, I forgot. Anyways, I think you get my point. Some of these older lenses you can pick up for incredibly low prices, like this Nikon 50mm f2. The image quality is incredible, as these lenses are a perfect match to the D40's 6-megapixel image sensor. For more info, check out my previous video on the D40. There is a huge selection of vintage lenses out there for pretty much every budget, like this tiny 50mm f1.8 pancake, or the fantastic 100mm f2.8 Series E lens. Look how small that is. For wildlife, check out this Nikon 135mm 2.8 lens with built-in lens hood. The results will blow you away. So now, Nikon D40 special retro mode step by step. Attach a manual focus lens. Set the camera into manual mode. Now the camera is fully manual, like the rangefinder from the 1960s I showed you. Remember, the camera will not meter. The only help you have from the camera is focus confirmation in the viewfinder. Again, just like in the 1960s. The only way to set and read the aperture is on the lens, just like in the olden days. The shutter speed is controlled normally on the selector wheel. Now you have to meter. Remember the handheld meter I showed you? Now it comes in handy if you're not sure. Press the button, match the needle, and read the aperture shutter speed combination on the meter. But what if you don't have an external meter or you don't want to use one? No problem. Remember when I told you that in the 1980s there was no way to check the final result? With a D40 you can do exactly that. Take a photo and replay it on the screen. If you see that the image is underexposed, like this one, adjust your shutter speed or aperture. Here I adjust my shutter speed from 1/200th of a second to 1/100th of a second. Take another photo. Replay the image, and bingo, you got yourself a nicely exposed photo. As I've shown you in my last video, the RAW files of the D40 have a lot of dynamic range for such a vintage camera, certainly enough to handle mistakes. As a tip, in high contrast situations, underexpose a bit as the images from the CCD sensor are a bit tricky to fix if they have blown highlights. Somebody asked me once why anybody would do that to themselves. Use a digital camera, fully manual without metering options, if we have much more automatic options available even with manual lenses. My answer to that is simple. It makes me a better photographer. Since I have done it so often, I can pick up any camera, new or vintage, and use it without a computer telling me what to do. It gives me a sense of accomplishment if my images can compete with those taken with the latest automatic wonders. But most importantly, I enjoy it very much and I hope you will too. Like and subscribe, and see you next time on Herb's Vintage Tech.